Hey, welcome to Impress the Boss. I'm Catherine.
I'm Laurel.
And I'm Valerie.
Where we talk about how to stand out without working overtime. This week is for the bosses. If you've been listening to us the last 3 weeks, we've checked out and analyzed 3 different Bobs. We've analyzed Bob Dean, Bobbie-Vida, and Bob Ross. Now, if you haven't heard those episodes, please go back and listen to our thoughts around those 3 characters. And those characters really represent people in the workplace, maybe yourself, maybe someone that you work with. This episode this week, we're talking to the bosses. If you're a boss, if you manage people, and you know, in reality, if you work with these different types of personalities, how can you really work well with these characters? So hopefully you get some good tips out of today's session. We're going to go through each Bob. We have a couple different tips for each Bob, and then we'll wrap up with some concluding ideas. So Valerie, we're going to start with you. Bob Dean was our first Bob, and that's a play on James Dean, the rebel without a cause, the Bob that doesn't like the traditional workplace boundaries. If you're a manager, how do you best manage this type of Bob?
Right. For a manager and for somebody who is working with a Bob Dean, the first tip would be to allow a Bob Dean to express and share their ideas. Give them the platform to do that. Yep. And allow them a time to get everything that they want to share. Otherwise, if that's not done, then that rebel of their side of that behavior characteristic will come out. And meetings, they'll try to dominate the meeting, and if they're not giving that time of space, I think that would be very detrimental to that person being able to share their ideas. Also, be very flexible. I think as a boss or manager over a Bob Dean, be flexible and just in work hours, or maybe allow them the opportunity to find their own work space, that they're not feeling claustrophobic or put into a box. I think is a good thing to remember when you're overseeing a Bob Dean, that they would probably tend to rebel more if you put them in a box more, but to really allow them that flexibility to be them and to be who they are, but give them that time and space and whatever they need. And I know some work environments aren't going to allow a Bob Dean too much flexibility, but I think if you are a manager or a boss of one, to keep that in mind and find ways that you can provide them that opportunity. And then lastly, help a Bob Dean to identify ways that they can move their ideas forward. Mm-hmm. Because 99% of the time, the ideas that a Bob Dean brings to the table are brilliant ideas, because they're brilliant. Mm-hmm. But it's finding ways to helping them move that idea forward and to help bring other people to collaborate with the Bob Dean ideas to see that it's moved to a place where it's a win-win for everyone.
There's such an idea of advocacy that you're talking about, Valerie, of the boss really being able to help and advocate and support their Bob Dean and looking for those opportunities.
Yes, I think that's a great word, advocate. Yes.
Because if you can get a Bob Dean into an environment where they are flourishing, where they're not constrained, then the positive side of that personality just really can shine and stand out.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yes. Thanks for those tips on Bob Dean, Valerie. The next Bob that we considered this week was Bobbie-Vida. And Bobbie-Vida was the fire, she was the passion, but she was also, she was the arriba. But she was also the moody one, the one who's very emotionally responsive within the workplace. And how do you then really manage that type of personality? I think there's a couple key things. Providing space to communicate. So when someone gets emotionally triggered, when someone's very passionate about something and there's a downside to that and they get frustrated or angry, they need space to be able just to speak. Yeah. So as a manager, it could, you could say, oh, do you have 5 minutes? Come into my office, and just allow them to breathe and allow them to vocalize what they're struggling through. So that's one way a manager can help. I think also with this type of personality, they can tend to hold grudges. So if they're not given the platform to be able to speak, it can just take deep root, and then it's much harder to address later on. So allowing that opportunity for them to be able to vocalize.
And Bobbie-Vitas are the kind that if they're not going to vent up to their boss, they're going to vent to somebody. So far better that they do so to their boss than start to create, waves throughout the organization.
That is such a great point, Laurel, that it's managing the grapevine. It's managing the cooler talk. How you do that is you allow and you invite a Bobbie-Vida into your space and allow them to share.
Right. So and address the issue right front.
Yeah. I think another thing a boss can do for a Bobbie-Vida is to really empathize. There is such a kind of negative connotation associated with emotion in the workplace. I actually think it's unhealthy. I was reading an article recently about how men and women need to be more expressive in the workplace. We're not robots. We're not worker bees. We're humans. We're humans working with other humans in an environment.
Right.
So as a boss, not judging a Bobbie-Vita's emotion, allowing them space just to speak. There's no shame, no guilt. And there's no guilt even associated that you are emotional, because employers actually want passionate employees. 70% of employees are disengaged, according to Gallup. So if you want the passion, you also have to learn how to manage the downside of that as well. So don't judge the downside and just want the positive. You have to accept both, and then how you mitigate those through empathy. And then just the last, that Bobbie-Vida brings that color and vibrancy to a workplace. So give them an opportunity to bring life.
Yeah.
Maybe it's emceeing an event. Maybe it's planning a party. Maybe it's something where they can show color and they can bring life and that just that arriba. Sorry, that's what I think of. Like that spunk to the environment. So really, as a manager, looking for opportunities for a Bobbie-Vida to excel and to shine as well.
Absolutely. I love in all of what you shared, like the idea and the concept of psychological safety comes out so much in what you said. And that is such a big topic right now of being a workplace that just provides that psychological safety, where we're not contributing to a flight or a fight or freeze, syndrome. We're not forcing our employees to, move to that place or causing them to move to one of those places. So
It's such a great concept. Laurel, the last Bob that we talked about was Bob Ross. So you want to share some tips for bosses on how to manage a Bob Ross?
Yes, absolutely. So Bob Ross, we heard such great examples through Valerie's own personal story about feeling like she can relate to Bob Ross. One of the ones that really comes out of that I liked a lot was just this concept of specifically inviting the input of a Bob Ross. Like oftentimes in meetings, we see the Bob Rosses are the ones who sit back and are quiet and don't speak up and don't share their ideas. And, they're wanting to pacify things and not create conflict and are concerned about that. So they're not going to be forthright in, sharing their thoughts or their ideas. So making sure that as a boss that you're specifically asking and inviting that feedback and that opinion from them is so critical.
That is very
and
critical.
inviting the opinion, even if it's contrary to your own, right?
Yes.
So even though it's inviting conflict, like helping and enabling them to voice it, even if it's different.
Absolutely. A second one is Valerie shared a little bit about overcommitting. So with Bob Rosses of the world, as bosses, what we can really do is help them to prioritize, actually look at their task list, their to-do list, their project list with them and help them to prioritize it and to understand what it is that truly is on their plate and is the most important, and help them to identify, can they actually say no to something, or can something be backburnered? So just giving that permission to them that it's okay to, to put things to the side in order to really prioritize something else over it.
Right. And that saying no is not a bad thing.
That's right. Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely. And then the last one that I would think of is that just because they say that everything is okay with them doesn't actually mean that it is okay. And I think oftentimes with our Bob Rosses, again, that peacemaker piece comes out in them, and they may be, having something going on inside that they're just not vocalizing and not bringing to the surface. So just coming with an awareness and a recognition of that you can't always take a Bob Ross at face value, that you got to be looking at what's probably going on under the surface for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that calm, cool, collected is great to have on your team. Mm-hmm. But even though they seem like they're always there that way, they're not always that way. So how do you help bring them out of their shell a little bit?
Exactly.
So hopefully some of these ideas helped you as bosses think about some personalities on your team and how you can really help encourage those working around you. Share your ideas if you're a manager or a boss, or if you work with these types of personalities on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, #ImpressTheBoss, about what you're doing to work with these personalities and some tips and tricks for us to all learn from. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you listening in. If you'd like to learn more about the Bobs, go to ImpressTheBoss.com, where you will see all our Bob characters and hopefully find one that you relate to as well. While you're there, subscribe to be part of our crew and you'll get our free tool download. Also, follow us on social, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook for our daily standout tips. Thanks for joining, and until next time, Bob's out.